Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this ReGaming.com video, I'm going to be answering a question that a great number of you have. Should you purchase the RTX series of graphics cards as things stand right now? Currently, reviewers are starting to plonk their reviews online, but with a couple of large caveats. But to also tackle another question that I'm sure some of you have, we are getting the cards. We actually have an RTX 2080 Ti that we've purchased from our own funds. That's partly what you guys help us with on Patreon to, of course, to update the equipment that we have. So as part of our pledge to you to use your funds as we, tell you we will, we are updating our hardware, and one of the ways we're doing that, of course, is purchasing the RTX 2080 series of GPUs, as well as an AIB sending us the RTX 2080 Vanilla. There's a slight problem though. The review has been held back a little bit because, Nvidia are so late providing drivers to reviewers. And so because of that, a lot of reviewers didn't even get their cards at best until Friday. And goodness help you, if you happen to miss a delivery or the shipment was late, you might not have even gotten the card as it was supposed to have been delivered on Friday. So you can imagine what issues that would have. You can imagine what issues that would have, because you've only got a couple of working days to actually test the GPU, which is a massive shame. So that's meant that a lot of reviewers are actually held back from testing, including ourselves. We're waiting for the RTX 2080 to be delivered. But there's also another issue, and that one is quite simple. It's called ray tracing. Well, actually, there's also DLSS. In a nutshell, because titles right now are not exactly abundant on the shelves, and putting it as abundant would be incredibly generous. In fact, there's only really Final Fantasy 15, which is a very limited benchmark that's only really available to reviewers unless someone leaks it, which of course we wouldn't do, at least, if you want to remain in Nvidia's good graces. So the fact of the matter is, for consumers, there is no titles which take advantage of ray tracing or DLSS at the moment. But of course, this will happen in the coming months. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Battlefield have pledged to have post-patch support, which will add these features in. And this is another reason that you should stick with us here on YouTube, as well as other reviewers, and keep an eye on these results, because ultimately, one of the key features, of course, which is missing in action, is ray tracing. So it's like, let's take the pricing of these GPUs out of the equation. Let's take away the performance results of, vanilla rasterized games. You also might just be wanting to see, hey, I want the latest and greatest technology. Should you purchase an RTX series GPU? And honestly, if you're purchasing for that reason, we just don't know yet, because reviewers don't have it, apart from very limited footage that Nvidia have supplied themselves, and, a couple of murmurs here or there from developers regarding the performance. And ray tracing does look rather beautiful, but that doesn't mean much, right? It's like, how viable is it with the RTX 2080? And no reviewer can tell you that. It doesn't matter if they have the card, because the software just does not support it yet. It is not available to reviewers, and it, of course, is not available to regular consumers. So now, with that out of the way, let's discuss the two cards in question as a broad overview, then we'll start going into performance metrics. So, the RTX 2080, the vanilla card, slightly pips the GTX 1080 Ti, or Ti if you prefer, to the post in some games, and in others it does the reverse. It falls behind a couple of percent. But you can essentially say that it swings and roundabouts. It's 6 of one, half a dozen the other, or you can just basically say that. It's pretty much doing what you would expect from one generation to another. Just like, let's say, the GTX 1070 beat out the 980 Ti and so on. We are seeing the same thing here. We are seeing the previous generation cards roughly equal or match the performance of the flagship of the previous generation. That's just normal. The RTX 2080 Ti, meanwhile, is faster. How much faster? Well, there you go, because ultimately, it's around 30-ish%. It does depend heavily on the game and the application. But let's now start going into some specific examples here, and then we can go over what I personally think of the GPUs. Okay, so now let's go through some performance results. We'll start things out with Middle-earth, Shadow
of War and Hardware Canucks are providing us the results here. We'll start with the 4K. Well, yeah, the 2080 Ti achieves an average of 72 FPS compared to 49.89 FPS of the 1080 Ti. That is a quite substantial difference. That's actually a tangible result difference. And this is also one area where we see the RTX 2080 vanilla quite clearly outperform the 1080 Ti. It doesn't manage, unfortunately, to break the 60 FPS barrier, but even so, there is a nice performance jump here. Sticking with Hardware Canucks and Witcher 3 this time, 72 FPS for the 2080 Ti Founders Edition, and we have the vanilla 2080 achieve 55.72. Once again, it appears that we cannot see the 2080 manage to hold above 60 FPS average on a title at 4K. But yes, both cards are substantially faster than their predecessors. 38ish FPS for the 1080, and well, the 1080 Ti manages just 50.88. So yes, we are going above the magical 60 FPS mark. Just for point of comparison, I've also included Guru 3D's results with The Witcher 3. They're obviously at slightly different settings, but 4K, and you can see that things are a lot closer packed together. But yes, of course, the 2080 Ti does dominate proceedings here, but it's not massive. You're looking at 66 FPS compared to 78ish FPS, so even the 1080 Ti does manage to achieve over 60 FPS at 4K with these particular settings enabled. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a rather interesting game. It actually is one of the titles, of course, which is going to be supporting ray tracing technology, but thus far it is not available to users or reviewers, so we can only test it using the standard rasterization methods. In other words, well, yeah. So the RTX 2080 Ti with 1440p, 107 FPS, which is a noticeable jump over the 84 of the predecessor, the 10 Ti, which is also neck and neck with the 2080 Ti. With the RTX 2080. They're essentially identical, and we can see exactly the same thing at 4K. Unfortunately, the RTX 2080 Ti cannot manage to achieve 60 FPS or greater average with Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 4K with the highest quality preset. This is possibly something that could be improved with driver update. So TechSpot, anyway, they're managing to achieve just 59 frames per second. But if we were to move over to Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus, well, things are a little different. 170 FPS at 4K, 170 FPS average at 4K, and that is considerably faster than what the 1080 Ti manages to achieve. So 110 versus 170. And yes, this is one area where we can say that the RTX 2080 distances itself rather comfortably from the 1080 Ti. So in this instance, yes, Turing is considerably faster. On to bittech.net and their results of Deus Ex Mankind Divided at 1440p, 86 FPS average compared to a custom 1080 Ti which scores 71 FPS. So if you're looking at a custom card, they are able to, of course, achieve higher clock speeds, which does help it fight off the Founders Edition standard vanilla RTX 2080. But essentially, those two cards perform identically to one another, and you know, the placings are also very similar at 4K as well. But with DirectX 12 Ultra settings at 4K, only 49 FPS, unfortunately, for the RTX 2080 Ti, which is a shame given the price point of these GPUs. Switching back for a moment though to Guru 3D and a non-gaming benchmark, V-Ray, yeah, it's quite clear that in this area, when it comes to computer-orientated functionality, the RTX 2080 and 2080 Ti are considerably faster than the previous generation. In terms of overclocking, we're looking at around 10% improvement over the base frequencies, which is a little lower than what I was hoping for, and I'm looking over a couple of different reviews, and all of the reviewers thus far are reporting around the 9%, 11% increase in clock frequency. Of course, that isn't taking into account GPU boost and so on, so Frequencies, of course, will go up and down. Power consumption, though, is one area where we do see a tangible difference, with the 2080 Ti quite frequently peaking about 40 watts more power draw than the 1080 Ti. In fact, in some reviews, we're actually seeing the peak power consumption of the 2080 Ti be higher than the RX Vega 64. To Nvidia's credit, though, when it comes to the Founders Edition cards at least, the acoustics are pretty good, and they are slightly better than the previous generation. And what about DLSS performance? Well, unfortunately, the only benchmark, and I stress that in a very loose... So what about other features? What about ray tracing? Well, so what about DLSS performance? The only benchmark we have thus far is Final Fantasy 15, which is a very small set of results ready for us to compare anything with. So my main criticism is we don't really have any way to test ray tracing or DLSS outside of one benchmark which has been provided from Final Fantasy 15. In the case of the 2080 Ti, we're receiving 42 FPS, but with DLSS, 56 FPS, which is quite a jump. And the RTX 2080, similar performance, 33 FPS with TAAA, and 45 FPS with DLSS. This is a pre-release build though, so it's possible performance will go up. However, I don't think, while that is certainly compelling data, I don't think it's enough to say yes, this is a great feature, or no, this is not a great feature, because we just don't have enough performance information here. One game is not enough to say how well this feature works overall. It's certainly a compelling argument, but I do want to see more results here, and of course we want to do a lot of more benchmarking with real games to see whether it manages to achieve that in standard gaming scenarios, where of course a lot more can happen compared to a very small test area that is this demo.
Okay, so what we have here is clearly a mixed bag of results. At their best, games such as Wolfenstein and Doom with Vulkan do extremely well on Turing. There is a clear separation between the 2080 vanilla and the GTX 1080 Ti. And when we jump to the 2080 Ti, things get better still for Turing. There is a noticeable leap. Compute-orientated functions as well do very well on Turing. So if you're buying Turing with the idea of, yes, I want a game, but I also need this GPU for some professional level work as well, GPU computing, then you can definitely say that Turing is a great investment, which isn't surprising given what we know of the architecture. That's great. But if you are focused primarily on gaming, if we look at the other results, there are some instances where Turing, at least right now, cannot hit 60 FPS. It's clear though with the results that game optimization on the driver side might improve things somewhat. I do get the feeling that these drivers are just not optimized as much as possibly they should be. And we can see that anyway. Games are just thin on the ground right now that take advantage of DLSS and ray tracing. And by thin on the ground, I mean they don't exist, at least to consumers. We saw the Final Fantasy 15 benchmark which shows DLSS, but that's one benchmark which is only available to reviewers, and on top of that it is not final code by any means, and you can't even do free running. It's not available to the game at large. It's only a very limited benchmark, which of course means that if you go outside the path, we don't know yet how well that's going to work in regular games. So that's definitely something that we need to take notice of. For 4K though, right this minute, there is nothing faster than the RTX 2080 Ti. The problem is, it's very, very expensive. That right there is the rub. You've got Nvidia asking this amount of cash, and the amount of money isn't necessarily a thing for me to say don't buy the cards, because ultimately, what you do with your money is down to you. I actually have had people who ask, should I buy 2 of these cards? Which, if you've got that cash, great, but the performance is one thing. I think that Nvidia have managed to achieve a fairly decent performance jump compared to Pascal. The issue is that you are asking this money when reviewers cannot physically test certain features of the card. And by certain features, I mean literally two of the biggest features, ray tracing, which is what they dedicated a great deal of their conference to, and DLSS. DLSS looks a very cool technology, but I can't give a recommendation, and nor can any reviewer, even if they have the card, because you can't test things that, well, you don't even have software to test. You can't just guess. And as for ray tracing, how well does ray tracing run, let's say, in the RTX 2080? I don't know. No one really does. We've heard some murmurs from developers, but essentially speaking, we can only assume that it's going to do this or that. We don't know. It's possible that with optimization, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Battlefield could hit 60 FPS at 4K, no problem. Or it's possible that it could struggle 60 FPS at 1080p. No one really knows, and probably even the developers themselves, because it is not final yet. And that's really difficult for people to make a judgment. Therefore, Nvidia are in this position where they are asking X amount of cash, whether it's the 2080 or the 2080 Ti, for, well, essentially only rasterization, because we can't use those other features. Now, here's the situation for you as a consumer. The 1080 and the 1080 Ti, as well as the other Pascal cards, from what we understand, are going to stick around to the holiday season, but no more are really being produced in volume, that's putting it mildly, and of course, they are starting to run out at retail. If you do want to get a 10 series card, so for example the 1080 Ti, by all means do so, but do it as fast as possible. There is actually a couple of Amazon affiliate links you can use in the video description. Even if you don't use those though, which do of course help us out, we do advise you buy one of these cards as fast as possible, because the price is going to start going up. The other option, of course, is you could go to eBay. I have had a look at the pricing, but of course pricing fluctuates all the time, and 2 seconds after I put this video up, the price could go like down $100, or it could go up $300 for the same architecture for the 1080 or the 1080 Ti or the 1070 Ti or whatever. As of the time I'm recording this though, there is about $100 price difference between used and new. That could get better or it could get worse over time. No one really knows. So here's the situation, and if you just need a card right this moment, you have the choice. You can either, let's say you've got around $500 to $600, you have the choice of either buying the RTX 2080 or the 1080 Ti. A lot of people are going to say, well, the 1080 Ti is a better option because you have more VRAM there. It's got 3 gigabytes more VRAM. Performance is roughly equal. But you can also counter that quite happily by saying, yes, but Turing's drivers are still really early and we could get another 5 or 10%. Plus we have those other features, DLSS, as well as ray tracing. I'm going to ask you a question. Would having features in the graphics menu bother you if you cannot enable them? Now, I'm going to speak for myself here, not for you. For myself, for me, myself and I, that would bother me. But that's because I'm a sucker for tech. I'm just going to be honest. It would bug me just having plonked down $600 or whatever it is in your regional currency on a card when I cannot use certain features. I would rather buy a 2080, but that's just me personally. I'm not saying that's the best decision, because honestly, as a consumer right now, there is no best decision. It really is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. If you want the best card, the 2080 Ti is without question the fastest single card available for consumers outside of GPUs like the Titan V, which is arguably faster in some instances. The other reason to get a 2080 or a 2080 Ti as well, other than the 1080 or whatever, is quite simple. You are looking for a GPU which also can be used for compute-orientated stuff. If that's the case, it's like a double bonus for you. You've got, yes, the ability to run games at high frame rates much faster than, let's say, Vega, but the compute performance is roughly on par with Vega. And I say roughly because, of course, it does depend upon the application. It's really difficult to say yes, buy it, or no, don't buy Turing. If it was a case where we had more benchmarks of DLSS and we can test out ray tracing, I would 100% say go for it if you have the cash, because ultimately they are cool technologies, and I do personally fully and truly believe that ray tracing is not going to be a flash in the pan. AMD, Nvidia, Microsoft, all of these companies are pushing ray tracing. It will be there. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be standard in every game, but I suspect DLSS especially is going to be rather popular. It's not that difficult in comparison for developers to really implement this, and Nvidia of course are going to want to sweeten the deal. So I do suspect that that's going to be consistently available. The problem is, of course, it does require developers to enable it in games. It's not like it's just being able to crank up the resolution. It's very easy for me to say, well, the benefit of this card is you get 65 frames a second versus 47 frames a second in a game. That's a very easy, simple way for me to tell you whether a card is better or not. As it is, whether it's a reviewer, whether it's a consumer, it's very hard to argue the value of a feature that you cannot enable, and I think that's the biggest problem right now. Yes, the cards are slightly more power hungry than the previous generation. I don't necessarily know if that's a big deal or not. To some people it will be, but I do believe that the acoustics are pretty good. So, yeah, if you've got a pretty good card right now, I'm just going to put it out there. You've got a 1080, you're playing at 1440p. Do you really need to upgrade this second? If you see a really cheap 1080 Ti, let's say going on eBay for a steal, let's just be silly and say $350. Okay, great, go for it. If not, and you can wait, and you're saying, okay, you know what, it doesn't really matter right now. I guess I can, I don't know, go fly on a holiday somewhere instead, or I can just plonk the money in my piggy bank and buy something else. Then that might be the better way to go. With that said, I do really like the cards. I think they're going to be awesome, and they are the fastest GPUs available. It's going to be fascinating to me, though, to see how this software is going to develop over the next several months. And whether or not you decide to put down your money, do let me know in the comments below. I will be very happy to do testing on DLSS. I will be very happy to do testing on ray tracing. It's kind of ironic, though, that we just can't do that yet. So, I guess in that regard, we're all going to have to wait. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video and found it informative. As I said, we will be reviewing these cards fully when we get our samples, and of course, we will also be testing out ray tracing and DLSS and all of this other stuff when that becomes available as well, which it's just not to anyone right now. With all that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.